Well, welcome back after a 2-week vacation. Okay, where were we? I think we're with the Israelites somewhere, weren't we? The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It's called the Torah. In Hebrew, that word means law. It's what's called the Law of Moses. It was like the first written part of the Bible that anybody had. The word for it in Greek is the Pentateuch. So hear that term also, which means fivefold vessel. Genesis, 50 chapters. We spent 11.5 chapters in ancient history. We spent 39 chapters in the story of the descendants of Abraham. So had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph. Joseph was the 11th born son of Israel, of Jacob, who became known as Israel. He had 12 sons. So his sons, from Abraham, we have Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob, and then his 12 sons. So the whole Israelite nation is his 12 sons and the story of them. Joseph was one of them. He was the one that ended up, his brothers sold him. He went into captivity in Egypt. He became second to Pharaoh because of his ability to interpret dreams. Later, through 7 years of feast, he stored up wheat. 7 years of famine, he fed everybody. That is how they all ended up in Egypt. At the end of Genesis, we saw the death of Joseph at 110 years old. Then we went to Exodus, and that was a whole story of Moses getting them out of Egypt. They'd been there 400 years. They had started out as being like these great welcome guests. Over 400 years, the original pharaohs had started dying off, and they got so numerous and so big that they were afraid that they would take over them. So they ended up becoming slaves. That was when they cried out to God, and God sent Moses to go get him. So then we saw in Exodus how Moses took them out, got him out through his miracles with in front of Pharaoh to get him out and get him released, the crossing of the Red Sea, and to Mount Sinai. They had spent about a year in Sinai, and remember, God gave them the 10 Commandments. Remember how God first gave them the commandments? Remember, he verbally spoke it to them, and it scared them all so bad that they said, Moses, you just go get notes for us and let's read your notes. We don't want to hear from God again. It scared them so bad. So that happened at Sinai. Then at Sinai, we also got the book of Leviticus. Leviticus was the book it's called the Law of the Levites. Leviticus means like that pertaining to the Levites. Levi was the 4th born son of Israel. Levi, the reason they became all the priests and the ones who take care of the tabernacle that we'll see today. They became the priests because when Moses came down off the Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, and he saw that they were worshiping a golden calf, and he said, who will stand by me? And it was all his family. Moses was of the tribe of Levi. Moses had not been a priest up until that point. Moses was just the one God sent, but he was of the descendants of Levi. All his family stood by him, and so they were blessed because of that, because they stood on God's side at this time, and so they became the ones who became the priests. So when we see everything about priests, you'll know they'll always have been a descendant of Levi. So in the book of Leviticus, which is all of that pertains to Levi, it's all of the laws and regulations that God gave to the people. And as you've been seeing on Wednesday night, and this last Wednesday night, it's all about, there are 10 commandments, and there's 613 laws that were given to them. But it wasn't laws to keep them, like God trying to keep them under his thumb and keep control of them. But it was stuff like how to prepare food, what clothes to wear, how to deal with if your sheep gets out and eats someone else's cabbage. I mean, just whatever. It deals with all of these just day-to-day life syndromes. Even stuff like how to dig a latrine is in there. Don't eat bats is in there. I mean, just common sense stuff. There was a lot of laws that pertain to worship and sacrifice and the temple and how the priests and stuff are supposed to act. So there's a lot of that in there too. but then a lot of it is just common sense stuff for how to live a clean life. And like Wednesday night, as Pastor Dwayne was talking about, it was a lot about, like, if you have mold in a house, how are you supposed to get rid of that? Just common sense stuff. So that was the 613 laws. So Leviticus gets us through that and gets us, we end up in the end of Leviticus with the tabernacle has been built. The Levites now have been there 1 year and a month, and they're getting ready to leave, and they're getting ready to go to the promised land. God had promised the descendants of Abraham that they would have the land of Canaan, that would become their land. But they had been there for a short time. Abraham had been there, and he left with his family to go, when Jacob left to go to Egypt. 400 years later, now instead of just 72, there's probably 2 million, and they're going to go back. But remember, God took them out of Egypt. They didn't go to church, they didn't go to Sunday school, they didn't have children's Bible study in the summer. None of that was taking place. So God took them to Mount Sinai for a year to teach them. So now they had the laws, they had commandments, they knew who God was, they had heard God's voice, they had seen his miracles. They knew a lot about God now. And so now they're ready to go into their land. If God had just taken them straight to the promised land, it would have been disaster. No one would have known what to do. There wouldn't have been any organization. So we see in these next two chapters, in Numbers and Deuteronomy, God organizes them to go forward to the land of Canaan. Remember, this land of Canaan now is descendants of Cain. He was the one who Noah had cursed, the son of Ham. And his descendants have taken over that land. They're not supposed to be there, but they're in that land. And so they have to go in as a military force and drive all these people out of their land, the land of Canaan, which is what modern-day Israel. And so God is preparing them, get them ready to go do this. So that gets us into the book of Numbers. And so tonight we'll do Numbers and Deuteronomy, and then we'll be through with the Torah. So any questions on that quick overview? I went through like 3,000 years in like 3 minutes. Okay. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this beautiful evening. Thank you for an opportunity to come together as a family of believers, just to dig into your words. And Father, I just ask you to fill this building with your Holy Spirit. Just fill us just with a heart of openness and acceptance to knowledge and truth, and just open our eyes and our ears to these stories. Just give us understanding. And Father, just help me to speak things that are clear and understandable, and just the truths from you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. So Numbers. Numbers is kind of a funny name for this book. If you remember, the names of books were related to like the first word in the book. Genesis, beginnings; Exodus, exiting, getting out; Leviticus, Levites. But Numbers should have probably been better named as either wanderings or complainings or murmurings or something else. But they used the name Numbers. The reason for that is that God had them take a census of the number of people right before they left Mount Sinai. And then there's another census 40 years later at the end of the book. So there's two censuses when they did this. That's how I got the name Numbers. But it really doesn't, the whole book isn't about numbers. So you don't have to be a mathematician to study this. It's more about, you can be a historian to study it. So God has led his people Israel through the wilderness on the way to Canaan. As the book opens, the Israelites leave with the new laws, commandments, and the tabernacle. As the book closes, they wait to hear the trumpet blast and signal to cross over the Jordan into the promised land. Hebrew tradition of the book usually goes by the first word of a book, but the book has gone by several names: the book of journeying, the book of murmurings. But the name given by its translators in the Septuagint is the book of Numbers, coming from the two censuses. Moses is the one who wrote this book near the end of his life as they were camped getting ready to cross over the Jordan River. And the first census was taken before the Israelites left the camp at Mount Sinai, and the second, perhaps 38 years later, just before crossing the Jordan River. They're at Mount Sinai. They're getting packed up and ready to go. They have built a tabernacle. They have built this worship center that includes a big outer courtyard, a big tent that has two compartments. One is called the Holies, one is the high holy place or the Holy of Holies. So it's got 2 rooms in it. And in this, it's filled with articles. So in the book of Exodus, we saw all of these instructions given how to build this tabernacle, how to build all the pieces for it. There's gold, all sorts of gold instruments that are used. When you first walk in, as you walk through the gate from the east, there would have been a big altar for sacrifice. As you're walking up to the entrance of the temple, on the left-hand side, there's a big golden wash basin where the priest would wash himself before they go in. When you go inside, in front of you, there's a table of incense. On your right-hand side, there's a table with showbread. On the left-hand side, there's a menorah with 7 candles. Then there's a veil into an enclosed room where the Ark of the Covenant is. And the Ark of the Covenant, the only time anyone went in there was one day a year on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest would go in and sprinkle blood on the seat of it, which we call the mercy seat. And that was where the presence of the Lord had been. Tabernacling comes from a word that means God with us. So God that was his home. He was right there with them at that time. His spirit was right there. That's why they would see the flame by night and the great cloud by day. To move, it would lift up, and the cloud would start to move, and then they knew that it was time to pack everything up and go. So this was how they were to go and travel. Right now, we're right here. Somewhere over here. So everybody wave. Okay. And if we head over to, I'm going to go to Kadesh first. So we'll fly across the big pond real quick and land here in the desert. So they are at Mount Sinai, which, as I showed you week before last, is probably right here. They're about 160 miles from this place called Kadesh. Kadesh is on the south end of the land of Canaan. This whole area right here is called Canaan. This land right here. Here's the Jordan River runs right here. This is the Sea of Galilee where Jesus taught. This is the Dead Sea. Jerusalem is right here. This whole area right here is Canaan, which became Israel. Who's there now? The returned Jews and a whole bunch of Palestinians. And some American tourists. So they're going to come here and land and go to Kadesh and start their journey. They're 160 miles away. How long does it take to walk 160 miles? That's like Truth or Consequences to Las Cruces and back. I drive it in like an hour and 10 minutes. So it's not far. Even with old people and animals and young kids, you could still make 3 or 4 miles a day perhaps. So you might be looking at 30 to 40 days, 60 days at the outside. Short trip. But it ends up taking them nearly 40 years before they finally get there. And Numbers is all about this journey of 160 miles over 40 years. Does anybody know why it took so long? Well, you will when we get done today. Okay. So in this, we start out with the census. So in the book of Numbers, we're going to start out with a census on it. And just kind of as an overview, if we look at this, we start out at Mount Sinai, and we're going to start out with some preparation work. We're going to get organized. They're going to set up like camps. They're going to set up, okay, who's going to carry what? Who's going to take what? How are we going to do this? Then when we get to Kadesh, the second place where I just showed you, something happens. There's a test here. God tests them. It doesn't turn out real well. After that, because of the results of the test, they spend 38 years wandering around in circles in this area between Kadesh and the Red Sea. And then finally, at the end, 40 years later, they end up at the plains of Moab, getting ready to cross over the Jordan River. So the book of Numbers takes them from leaving Mount Sinai with the law, the 613 laws, the 10 commandments, their tabernacle, their worship centers, their Levites all set up. They get all that at the Mount Sinai. And then at the end of Numbers, they are getting ready to cross over the Jordan River into the Promised Land. So it starts out Mount Sinai, then Kadesh, then wanderings, then back on the plains of Moab. And we'll go through all this. So the first thing they start out in chapter 1 and chapter 26, we have these two censuses taken. Does anybody hide when the census people come by? Boy, I do. I don't know why. I just hide from them. Leave the gate locked and the dog's out. So Moses is commanded to take a census of the first day, on the first day of the second month in the second year after they came out of Egypt, every male from 20 years old and above who are able to go to war. And there's 603,550 of them. So in this census, they're not counting men, women, and children. They're just counting men over the age of 20 who can fight with a sword. So men from 20 to, it'd have to be a light sword for me at 59, so probably from 20 to 60-ish, or 20 to 70 maybe. So it's all of those. So if there's 603,550 total of just men able to fight, then how many would we have total? You have their wives, you have young people, you have older people, you have children, maybe 2 million, 2 to 3 million. So it's a big group of people. It's quite a bunch of them. So they have this census. Then again in chapter 26, we have another census taken. Now this is 40 years later, and we have an entire new generation. And we'll talk about this further. The first generation, except for just a few, has passed away, and we have an entire new group of people right across the river. And see, the number there is 601,730. So within about 2,000 people being the same. So the two censuses, the first one and the one 40 years later, are almost identical. Now then, in chapter 5 through 10, so we see this in chapter 1, chapter 5 through 10 are final instructions before the journey. And in this, let me go here. We have, during this time in these chapters, we have inventory and assignments, purgings, presentations, final instructions. This is all preparing for the journey, these first 9 chapters. Now, what God does is he gives them instructions on how they're going to camp. How are they going to set up by camp? Where is the temple going to be? Which direction is the temple going to face? How are they going to set everything up? So they're given specific instructions on where they're going to set up their camp and how they're going to camp at night. Also, what's given here is marching instructions. Okay, when we leave, when we get ready to head out, who goes first, who goes second, who goes third? As it turns out, there's 6 tribes that go in front, then the Ark of the Covenant, and then 6 tribes in the back. And it's like military precision. It's like setting up a whole military campaign for moving it. You know how everything points to Christ? What God does is he gives them specifications on who's going to camp on the east side, which 3 tribes, who's on the west side, who's on the south, who's on the north, and tells them where they're going to camp. He gives them this would be right here. It's kind of hard to see. This is the tabernacle. This is the outer courtyard, and then the tent itself. Moses and Aaron and their sons, Aaron has 3 sons. They are given instructions on what they're to do. Remember, they are the ones who are going to take care of the tabernacle. The tribe of Levi has the priests, but then it has all of the people who take care of the church. It's like your janitors, your electricians, your plumbers, all the people that are going to take care of this. How many people have, I know everybody here has probably seen Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. The kids now probably haven't, but you know when they'd come to town, it was like this huge line of trucks that would come in, and then they'd set up this huge tent, and there'd be seats and bleachers and funnel cake machines and cotton candy machines, and just like this whole entourage came in. But then when they were done, it was packed up and gone quick. Well, everybody had a specific job to do. And what God does is he gives the 3 different sons different jobs. One family is going to take care of like all of the poles, and we'll talk about that, all of poles. One maybe takes care of like the altar. One son takes care of other parts. So they each have their exact job to do to pack this thing up. So we're given that instructions in here. The other thing is all the tribes. We're given Judah, Ephraim, and then all of them has expanded out. Now what I did on this, I did this in scale on AutoCAD, and what I thought about was like, for instance, the tribe of Judah, 74,800 fighting men. So I figured, okay, you've got 74,800 families. You've got a tent, you've got a wife, you've got 2.3 kids, you've got a dog, a cat, you've got a goat and a cow. And what else? An RV? A chicken, yeah, chickens. So each person's going to require some area. So what I thought is, well, each family is going to have a tent that's maybe, 10, 20 foot by 20 foot, and they have to have room to park all this stuff and have a campfire. And I kind of laid this out in scale to see what this would look like. And if you imagine, like, remember in Christmas luminarios? What if everybody had a campfire going? You have all these people camped, and everybody has a campfire. When you fly over it, it looks like that. It's like the largest luminario cross ever lit. And this is roughly like 6 miles long by 4 miles wide. It's huge. You got 2 million people camped out here. At Elephant Butte Lake, we get 120,000, and it's a mess. So you can imagine what this is. But when we look at these, all of the tribes, Benjamin, Manasseh, Ephraim on the west, Dan, Asher, Naphtali on the north, Judah, Issachar, Zerubbabel on the east, and Reuben, Simeon, and Gad on the south. So they've all camped here. They lay out the camp like this. So every time they camp at night, this is what it looks like. And they all build a fire, and when God looks down, he sees the cross. Isn't that amazing? So this is part of the instructions that are given, how they're going to set up to camp, how they're going to set up to move. So in the mornings when God was ready for them to move, the smoke would lift up off the holy place. That was like, a mark, get set, go. And so now everybody has to start running around. The sons of Aaron and the tribe of Levi right in here, they quickly start putting all this stuff together, get it all packed up, ready to go. Everybody starts breaking camp, and then they head out. And so it heads out west and south, then the Levites in the east, and then the north, if I remember that right. But they all head out in precision order to go to the next spot. So God is a God of organization. He's never a God of disorder and chaos. He hadn't seen my shop. So that is kind of what is going on in the first part of Numbers, is setting all this up. Okay, so the first 4 chapters of Numbers detail the first census, arranging the tribes in their camps and care of the tabernacle and camp. Starting at chapter 5, the emphasis shifts to individuals within the camp. Moses, Aaron, and his sons. Remember, these were Levites. Aaron's sons, we had Gershom. He was responsible for the tents, covering, screens, and ropes. Mohath was responsible for the ark, table, lampstands, altars, and sanctuary utensils. Merari was responsible for the tabernacle supports, crossbars, poles, bases, and equipment. So each family had responsibility not only for their own campsite, but then for everything in the temple that had to be taken. So chapter 2 deals with the tribes and where they'll camp in relationship to the placement of the tabernacle and in what order they will travel. So God had this lined up from the start that, okay, we're not just all going to take off and like just a big crowd without any organization walking. We're going to walk in precision order by groups, by tribes, by family in order to get there. They get there. Let me go back a bit. Notice that it was on the first day of the second month of the second year. They left. Remember, when they were getting ready to go out of Egypt, that right after they got out, God said, "This will be the first month for you." That was the first month of the year. On the 10th day was when they had to take a lamb and inspect it for 4 days. On the 14th day, they slaughtered it. On the 15th day, in the morning, they left. That is the same day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem and proclaimed that he was the Messiah. He was inspected for 4 days by the Pharisees and the rabbis. They found no fault in him. He was put to death on the 14th. And anyway, so it's Passover. So that was the first three of God's feast days were, Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. So they fulfilled that exactly. That's how that started. And then Jesus fulfilled it at the end, 2,000 years ago. So they left on the 15th day of that month. So on the next year, on the same day, on the 15th day, they got to the base of Mount Sinai. 2 months later. Then a year and a month later after that, they're at Mount Sinai exactly 1 year. And so they left 1 year, 1 month, and 15 days later was when they left. So they'd been at Mount Sinai for 13 months. Now they travel to Kadesh, and they get there pretty quick. So they have now arrived at Kadesh. And it's a beautiful place. Unlike Las Cruces, not much there. But they get right here and set up camp. They're right at the southern border of going into Jordan. This is where things start going bad. What happens? They send 12 spies in. So now what happens is Moses sends 12 spies into the land. There is one man chosen from each tribe, from each of the 12 tribes, and they're going to go through the land and inspect it for 40 days and come back out. What was the reason for this? Did they want to go in and see whether or not it's worth taking? It was really more to plan a military strategy. Remember, they were going to go in and drive out all of these people. So more what they wanted to do is send these 12 spies to go in, go through the land, and figure out, okay, from a military campaign, how do we take this? What is our best strategy for this? So these would have been military experts from each of the tribes. There were 12 of them, 2 of them in particular, Caleb and Joshua. When they come back out, they give the bad report. And we know they come back out, and 10 of them say, this place is beautiful. It's exactly like God said it would be. Everything is huge there. The grapes are huge. It's just ripe. It's absolutely wonderful land. But there's giants there. There's too many people. They're too well fortified. We can't take it. Joshua and Caleb are the only 2 that say, no, we can take this. This is ours. God has given this to us. Let's go. Let's go take it. Well, because of this, because of their sin about not wanting to go in, is what causes them to have to wander another 38 years in the desert. So the spies' report and the people unbelief is chapter 12 and 13. So as the Israelites approached Canaan from the south, Moses sent spies ahead to see what Israelite armies would be facing. God chose to use this as a test of faith. Now, the areas that they covered, they left from Kadesh, and they would have gone all the way through here, past the Dead Sea, heading north, past where Jerusalem was, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, and they would have gone all the way to here's Caesarea Philippi and probably to the base of Mount Hermon. So they made about a 40-mile trek. So in 40 days, they made a 40-mile trek up there and then came all the way back. They went right through the middle and looked at the land and then came back out with their report. Interesting, later we see them go in from the east side, right in the middle, and go through and come back out. Have you ever heard the term divide and conquer? This is kind of what they do. Later we see in Joshua when they go right in the center and split the nation of Canaan into 2 and then take the south and then the north. So that's kind of where the divide and conquer thing comes from. So here he had sent them in from the south and they went right up the middle and came out. So in this, when they come back, Caleb and Joshua are the only 2 who are faithful. The rest wanted to appoint a leader and return to Egypt. And we know what happens on this, right? In Numbers 14:29, since they did not want to go in, they wanted to appoint the leader, they wanted to get rid of Moses, they wanted to go back to Egypt. Can you imagine that? These are people that a year ago saw the 10 plagues come on Pharaoh. They came out. Pharaoh's army chased them into the Red Sea. They went through it, and the sea covered them up and completely killed every soldier, every horse, every chariot, everything. They go into the desert. They see they don't see God, but they see the fire and the earthquakes and hear God's voice that scares them to death. They see all of these miracles. They see water. They see manna. They've seen water come out of a rock. And now they get here and they chicken out. So what happens here now is God says in 14:29, in the desert your body will fall, every one of you 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census, who has grumbled against me. So God tells them, says, every one of you that's over 20 years of age is not going to go in. I am going to raise up a whole new generation from those from infants to 20 years old. They'll be able to go in. And 2 others are allowed to go in. Who is that? Joshua and Caleb. No one else, all the new generation and Joshua and Caleb are the only ones that get to go in. So for 38 years, we see them wandering through the desert, and God just kind of keeps them moving around. We don't get a lot of information about that, just a few chapters, until they are all dead. Can you imagine at like 37 years? It's like, when's he going to die? When's he going to die? I wish they'd kick the bucket. You know, it's all these young generations, they know they get to go in, and they're just waiting for the old geezers to pass away. So all of these people have to die before this new generation can go in. But this new generation is a generation of those that were 0 to 20 plus all the newborns. So now we've got this group of like another 2 million people from 0 to 60 years of age that are going to go in. So it's a younger new generation. But this is a generation that hasn't seen the things of the past. You know, they weren't slaves there. They didn't see the plagues against Pharaoh. Didn't see the parting of the Red Sea. Some of the young ones may have. But most of them hadn't seen that. So it's, when you think about it, it's like a whole new generation that it gets to go in. Moses doesn't get to go in. Why is that? One mistake. The second time, remember when God told Moses to strike the rock with his staff and it will bring forth water? And he did. Remember last week I showed you that rock? It split from top to bottom. The second time, God said to Moses, this is later, he says, take Aaron and take your staff and go speak to the rock, and I will bring forth water. Moses gets there, and he's angry and mad, and I totally understand why. But he says, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, do I have to bring forth water from this rock for you? And he strikes this rock twice. He was not to have struck the rock. He struck it twice. But he also said, do I have to bring forth water? So he made it like all about him instead of all about God, it seems like. Because of that, he's not allowed to go in. If we look at this prophetically, Joshua is allowed to go into the promised land. Why is that? The scripture tells us because of his faith. So after the law, after the end of the law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, after the end of the law, Joshua, and Joshua's name is just one Hebrew character away from being Yeshua, our Savior. Joshua takes his people into the promised land because of their faith. Moses represented the law, right? And Moses was an incredibly righteous man. He made one mistake. And it's like this one mistake cost him, he does not get to go into the promised land, but Joshua, by faith, gets to go to the promised land. So it's kind of an interesting play there between the law and faith, and how we're not set. We don't go to the promised land by our keeping the law, but because of our faith. We'll see later some more about Joshua, but Joshua had been like Moses' right-hand man through most of this. He was a military leader. He was always with Moses. Went up on the mountain with Moses, on Mount Sinai on a couple of the trips. So he was the one who gets to lead the people in. So this is what happens in chapters 12 through 13, and this is the sin that the spies report. So they have this. They're not able to go in. The 12 come back. 10 of them say it's no good. They try to elect a new leader. They want to go back to Egypt. They want to go back into slavery. They want to go back to the world. But here we see that God condemns them all to death, and that their bodies will fall, every one of you, who is counted and assembled, because you have grumbled against me. Probably not a good idea to grumble against God. 1 year for every day the spies were in the land. So they were in the land for 40 days. So they have to spend 40 years in the desert. They've already spent nearly 2. So it's another 38 years that they're wandering before they get to go in. The other one is Caleb. Caleb was the other one who got to go in. And he gets to go in later, and he's like 80 years old. And we see later in Joshua that he wants the area around Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb was where these giant Amorites were. He wants that land. And he's like, yeah, I want it. I want to go get it. I'm going to drive them all out. I'll go kill them all. And so God gives him that land. And at 80 years old, he takes off to the north to go, conquer and divide. So it's interesting that he is so blessed, and still at 80 years old, he's still a warrior at the time for this. I kind of feel sorry for Joshua and Caleb, as they've seen it, they know how great it is, but they've got to hang out another 38 years before they get to go in. It's kind of like us waiting here now. Chapters 15 through 19 are about the wanderings. So Numbers doesn't give us a lot of information about that time. We're not to Deuteronomy yet. So here come on 15 through 19, we have the journey. So they start out at Sinai, chapters 1 through 9. Chapter 10, they get to Kadesh, on the southern end of the land. They send the spies in. The spies bring the report back. In chapter 14, we see judgment set on them, and then their desert wanderings are right here in the middle of the book, like 14 to 18. We don't have a lot of information on that. There's very few records of it. The wanderings wander between Kadesh and the Red Sea. So where they are, here is Kadesh, and then the Red Sea is over here. So they're right here in this area. They don't get very far. Remember, from Kadesh back to Mount Sinai is only 160 miles. So they spend their entire time, 40 years, marching around pretty much in an area the size of like here to El Paso. You're just all kind of in the same regional area. And they don't get very far. Chapters 22 to 36. The next part of it is when they get to Moab. 39 years have passed, or 38 years have passed. All of the people are starting to have died away or dying away. You're getting down to that one person. What would it have been like when you just have one person left? Is everybody sitting there watching him? Die. So they're finally waiting for him, and we get to that point at this chapter 22. I'm sure they wouldn't have been doing that. Well, maybe. So this gets us here. So once they get to this point, God leads them to an area across in the plains of Moab. And let me show you that. So they've been wandering down here in the southern part between Kadesh and the Red Sea. Now God leads them around past, this is the Dead Sea, on the east side of it. And they come up here to this area right here. And if we see this, it's all like pretty fertile farmland right now, just below the mountain. So this is like the plains of Moab. And they are right here. This is the Jordan River. And right over here is a little community called Jericho. And right over here is ancient Jericho. It's kind of out of focus. So they are on the plains right here, and they've set up camp, and they're getting ready to cross over. God has to do a few things with them first. And this we see in this, and then also in the first part of Joshua. So they're right here getting ready to cross over. They have come to this point. They're camped out. Jericho is within sight. The people of Jericho can look 20 miles like here over to the mesa and see this huge camp of 2 million people sitting there, knowing that they're going to come over and attack them. So remember the story of the Rahab and in Jericho and that whole story? Those people have been sitting there watching them camped over there for 2 months getting ready to come in. So yeah, they're probably either sticking around trying to lock doors or they've left town. So they're real close to Jericho at this point. So the Israelites are gathered at the plains of Jericho across the Jordan River from plains of Moab across the river from Jericho. A new census was taken. Now there's 603, 550,000 warriors have died, and 610 new ones had grown up to take their place. A new leader, Joshua, will be put into power in the finalization of God's law. The disposition of the Transjordan land on the east side of Jordan, the descendants of Reuben and Gad had great numbers of livestock, and they saw the land of Jasher and the land of Gilead. They spoke to Moses and asked for the land as possession. This is in Numbers 32. We have 12 tribes. We have 12 families. And I need to kind of expand on that. Remember, we had 12 sons of Joshua. 12 sons of Israel. Levi, that tribe became priests. And so if we take them out, then we have 11, right? Joseph was the 11th born son. He was the son who had gone into captivity in Egypt. Joseph, we don't see a tribe of Joseph. What we see is tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh. Those are his two sons. So we have Joseph is not in the line of into these tribes. Joseph is not in these tribes. Levi is not in these tribes. But Ephraim and Manasseh have taken their place. So that's how we have 12 now. Does that make sense? So Joseph, we don't see that name anymore in his family line. Levi, what has happened to Levi, they are the priests. And what they do is they get divided up where each one of the tribes gets a number of the priests to go with them as their religious spiritual leaders. So each one of the 12 tribes now has a small proportion of Levites in it that become part of their tribe. So when you see the names of the 12 descendants of Israel, his 12 sons, and you look at the 12 tribes of Israel, that's why the names are a little different. When they get here, God has promised them all of the land across the river. But when they get here, there's an area right in here. Well, you see here, this was all very fertile farmland. We see that still today. These are all farmland in here. Gad, the tribe of Gad, the tribe of Reuben, and half of the tribe of Manasseh had great herds of cattle and sheep. When they get to this plain, these three tribes ask Moses, hey, can we have some land on this side? This is great fertile grazing land, would be wonderful for our herds. So what happens on this side, while they're here in the book of Numbers, is Moses gives these three tribes, or 2.5 tribes, land on this side. So they are given land over here. He gives them a stipulation. All the rest, the other 9.5 tribes, have to cross over and fight all the Canaanites and chase them out, right? Moses gives them this stipulation. Said, you can have this land, but when we cross over, all of your fighting men have to go with them and fight all the Canaanites and get them out, and then they can return to the land, and they agree to it. So we have 2.5 of the tribes are on this side of the river, and the others are on the other side. eventually. But this happens here as they're given this land. So in this, like I say, in the disposition of the Transjordan, meaning the land across the Jordan, on the east side of the Jordan, the descendants of Reuben and Gad had great numbers of livestock, and when they saw that the land of Jazer was in the land of Gilead, they spoke to Moses and asked for the land as a possession. Moses designates Joshua, the son of Nun, to be the new leader, and goes up on the mountain to see the promised land. Okay, a couple things. Moses is not allowed to go, I keep hitting this, I'm sorry. Moses is not allowed to go into the promised land because of what he did at the second rock. And he pleads with God for it, and God basically tells him to shut up in a very nice, godly way. He says, don't mention this anymore to me. But God allows him to see it. And what happens to Moses before he passes away, be another hour and 10 minutes before he passes away, he allows him to go to Mount Nebo. This mountain right here is about a 20-mile walk or so from where he was. There is a tourist, let's see if I can see a picture of it here. This is kind of looking out from Mount Nebo. Not really sure what the significance of that is. But he is allowed to go here and see the land. And what he can see, and I'll show it to you. So I'm going to do this without making everybody seasick. This is looking north. So he's up here on top of this mountain looking out. And right up here is the Sea of Galilee. This is the Jordan River Valley. If anybody gets nauseous, just try to get out of the room. So from the top of Mount Nebo, he is able to see the entire landscape here, where all 12 tribes will live. He's looking down towards, right there is the Dead Sea. So he is able to see everything where they came in, and see all the land, and then see back to Kadesh, where they originally set up for campsite. So from the top of this mountain, it's about 2,000 feet high, he is able to see so from right here in Mount Nebo, he is able to see all of this. The mountains, where the Sermon on the Mount was, Capernaum, Kadesh. So from Mount Nebo, he's able to see all the land. So God allows him to see it all, but from a location, from the top of a mountain on the other side of the Jordan River. Then Moses dies. At 120 years old, he finally dies. He goes up on a mountain by himself. God takes him on top of a mountain. He dies, and God buries him. And at the very end of this chapter, we see that God buries him, and nobody knows where he buried him. What would be the reason for that? Exactly. Yeah, can you imagine if he had died, they would have embalmed him and mummified him and carried him across the river with them, right? And set up a shrine for him, and he would have become an idol to him. So in this, it's kind of interesting that we don't see, no one knows where he was buried. Just know that God buried him privately, but God did not allow him to pass into the promised land because of the one sin, and he represents the law. Joshua, who goes in because of faith, gets to go in, even though he probably didn't keep all the laws. So it's kind of an interesting scenario with what we deal with between law or faith. So in conclusion, the prominent sin of Numbers was murmuring against God. In Numbers 11:1, now the people became like those who complained of adversary in the hearing of the Lord. Numbers 14, not one of them will ever see the land of promise on oath to their forefathers. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went into, and his descendants will inherit it. Now, chart 23, we may have seen this already here. This is the one that's just kind of the summary of the book of Numbers. And then here, just looking at the 36 chapters, we had the first third is at Sinai, their trip to Moab, their wanderings, then what happened at Moab. So that kind of sums up these verses. But let me kind of go off on a tangent. I like tangents. God gave them this land, right? And what did God say about the land and anyone who would come against them? I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. So God has given them this land. He gives Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh the land on the other side of the Jordan, gives the other 10 half tribes the land, 9 half tribes land on the west side of the Jordan. And that is land that God gave them. I got this book in about 2004, and it's called As America Has Done to Israel. And it was really interesting because it covers that. Every time we have done something to bless Israel, you're smiling. Have you read this? Oh, yeah. We're getting there. Every time the U.S. has done something to bless Israel, we have been blessed. Every time we do something to curse Israel, we have been cursed. What would us cursing Israel, what an example of that be? Taking their land away. Anytime we try to take their land away, bad things happen. What have all the peace treaties been about? Every time someone comes with a peace treaty for the Middle East, it's always about, well, we'll give you this part of the land, and we'll take this part of the land. The Palestinians can go over here, the Jews can go over here. There's always a compromise. It's not the Palestinians' land. It never was. It's God's land, and he gave it to his people. Let me kind of give you guys some interesting things. That first book started with, it goes back to like Hitler, President Lincoln. This has been going on a long time. There you go. And this is just some of them, but you'll get a kick out of this. So if we look at giving the land away, and this is just going back like since 79. So the first time the U.S. government refers to veto an anti-Israeli resolution at the UN Security Council was 79. The Carter administration chose not to veto UN Resolution 446. 4 days after that, on March 26, the Egypt-Israeli peace treaty was signed in Washington. As a result of that treaty, Israel gave up a tremendous amount of territory. 2 days later, on March 28th, the worst nuclear power plant disaster in the U.S. made headlines all over the globe, 3 Mile Island. Number 2, October 30th, 91, President H. Bush opened the Madrid Peace Conference, which brought Israelites and Palestinians together to negotiate for the very first time. In his opening speech, Bush told Israel that territory compromised is essential for peace. At that exact time, the perfect storm was brewing in the North Atlantic. The legendary storm traveled 1,000 miles in the wrong direction, sent 35-foot waves slamming into President Bush's home in Maine. Number 3, October 23rd, 92, Madrid Peace Conference moved to Washington, D.C. The very next day, Hurricane Andrew made landfall in Florida, causing $30 billion in damage. Number 4, January 16th, 94, President Clinton met with President Assad of Syria to discuss possible of Israel giving up the Golan Heights. Within 24 hours, the Northridge earthquake hit Southern California, second worst natural disaster at that time in the U.S. January 16th, about Said that one already. January 21st, 98. Prime Minister Netanyahu arrived at the White House but received a very cold reception. President Clinton and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright actually refused to have lunch with him. The exact same day the Monica Lewinsky scandal broke. Imagine that. Sending the Clinton presidency into tailspin from it would never recover. Depends on what your definition of is. September 28, 98, Secretary of State Albright working on finalizing a plan which would have Israel give up approximately 13% of Judah and Samaria. On that precise day, Hurricane George slammed in the Gulf Coast with a gust of 175 miles an hour. May 3, 99, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat was supposedly to hold a press conference to declare the creation of a Palestinian state within Jerusalem as the capital. On that precise day, the most powerful tornadoes ever recorded in the U.S. ripped through Oklahoma, Kansas, 316 miles an hour. April 30th, 2003, the Roadmap to Peace, developed by the Quartet, was presented to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon by the U.S. Ambassador. Over the next several days, the U.S. was hit by a staggering 412 tornadoes, largest tornado cluster on record. 2005, W. Bush convinced Israel that it is necessary to move all the Jewish settlements in Gaza and turn the entire area over to the Palestinians. According to the New York Times, the very last settlement was evacuated on August 23rd. On that precise day, a storm that would be given the name Katrina started forming over the Bahamas. The city of New Orleans has not fully recovered from the damage of the storm yet. Costliest natural disaster of all U.S. history. On May 19, 2011, Obama told Israel they must return to a pre-67 borders. On that day, 3 days later, on May 22nd, a half-mile wide Force 5 multi-vortex tornado ripped through Joplin, Missouri. According to Wikipedia, is the costliest single tornado in U.S. history. Are these all coincidences? We haven't had many of those lately. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it would be. So the ones I had here were just to that point. But this was an interesting book. It went all the way back to things that were happening in the time of President Lincoln and Hitler and stuff. But it was just, it kind of goes to show when God's hand is on these people, it was, this was 3,000 years ago. And it still is today. But it's 7:30. It's time for break. So that's it for Numbers. Any question on it? What's that? As America has done to Israel. Also, up here on the stage, I brought in remember that kind of hokey deal I gave you 3 or 4 weeks ago? There's a real one back here. This one was done by a guy named Adams in like the late 1800s, I think. But it's pretty interesting. He takes from Adam and Eve all the way to the presidents of the 1800s, but it's kind of neat. It all folds up into a book, actually, but you might want to look at it. It's kind of cool. Okay, let's take a break. Deuteronomy, the last book. The book of Deuteronomy is like the last 3 sermons of Moses before he passes away. It is also a legal document. Remember, we saw in Numbers that God was a God of order. He had a way that he wanted to set up to camp, how you set up to move, what each person had specific jobs they were to do. But you see here that it was, God is not a God of chaos and confusion. He's a God of order. Everything that we see is legal, is the same way almost legally. And maybe legal is not a good way to use it. But Deuteronomy is like a contract between God and between the people. And it's pretty much the boilerplate of where all legal documents come from today. Is anyone in here attorney, lawyer? Okay. I had an attorney in one of my classes a few years ago at Sun City. And when I went through this, he's like, yeah, that's exactly a legal document. So it's almost like a document like if you were renting an apartment between you and the landlord. So and we'll go through this a little bit. So Deuteronomy is almost like a legal contract between God and the people. Kind of like in a legal contract, you like define who the people are. You say, okay, I'm going to pay rent. I'm going to pay it on time. If I don't pay it on time, this happens. The landlord's going to take care of maintenance. I have to replace my own light bulbs, whatever. There's a legal contract like in a landlord situation. That's kind of what this was. God was giving them the land, but it was like a legal contract for the land and for what he was going to do, what he would provide for them, what they would do in return, and then what would happen if either party broke that contract. So Deuteronomy is kind of like this. It's like this legal contract. But it's also Moses' last 3 sermons. They have traveled for 40 years. We now see them on the plains. They are set up camp across the Jordan River from Jericho. Find Jericho. So they're camped out right here. Moses knows he's going to die pretty soon. So this is kind of his last 3 messages to the people before he passes away. So from the notes, Deuteronomy's last message to the people from Moses is they prepare to enter the promised land. After finishing writing Deuteronomy, Moses gives instructions for the book. So Moses has now finished the Torah. He has written Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. He has the Torah. He has this book finished. In Deuteronomy 31, near the end of it, he says, when Moses had completed writing the words of the law in a book, when they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites, remember these are the ones that take care of all of the priests and leaders and rabbis. Okay, he commands the Levites who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the law and put it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there as a witness against you. For I know your rebellion and your stiff neck. If today, while I am yet living with you, yet alive with you, you have been rebellious against the law, then how much more after my death? So Moses finishes this book. He gives it to the ones who take care of the Ark of the Covenant. He says, keep this with the Ark of the Covenant. We need, so everybody can read it, know where it is, and refer to it. When did they refer to it again? Well, let me go to 2 Kings 22. In 2 Kings 22, King Josiah, he is sending messages to the high priest, and the high priest in verse 8 says, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And anyway, he gives it to an attendant. He takes it to the king. Now it happened, the king heard the words of the book of the law, and he tore his clothes. And the king commanded the priest, the son of Shaphan, go inquire of the Lord for me, for the people of all Judah, concerning the words of the book that have been found. For great is the wrath of the Lord that is roused against you, because of our fathers have not obeyed the word of the book. Do according to that is written concerning it. King Josiah finds the book 700 years later. And I thought I left my Bible sitting on the shelf a long time. They left their Bible, the Torah, next to the ark for 700 years, or with the ark, before anyone bothered to read it again. Then after Josiah, it ends up like not being found for quite a while after that too. So it's, even though Moses wrote all this for them, they never referred to it. In fact, I think it's not until Nehemiah and Ezra when they find it again. So, and he says that, take this book of the law and put it beside the ark, that it may witness against you. A witness against you, wow. For I know your rebellion, stiff neck. If while I am alive you have been rebellious, then even more after my death. The name Deuteronomy comes from the term second law, which was kind of a mistranslation of Septuagint. It should have been like a copy of the law. Deuteronomy repeats and amplifies the basic law which had been given to the people of Mount Sinai. Remember, this is like a document. So what happens in here in Moses' three last speeches is he kind of goes over, okay, here's what has happened. Here's what happened when we came out of Egypt. Here's what happened at Mount Sinai. He kind of gives an overview of what is leading up to this. So Deuteronomy reports and amplifies the basic law which had been given to the people on Mount Sinai. Deuteronomy was written by Moses. At specific places in the text, he is expressly identified as the author. The last chapter dealing with his death may have been written by Joshua. Remember, Joshua was his right-hand man his whole life. Moses probably wrote the book soon after he delivered the addresses and shortly before his death in 1405 BC. If we remember, they've spent 40 years in the wilderness, so it's 1445 when they came out of Egypt. 40 years, they'd be 1405. So 1445 is kind of a date of the Exodus. Israel had reached the border of Canaan, where they had been for 40 years earlier. But because of unbelief and disobedience, the people were not allowed to enter. God was willing and ready to lead them to victory and to give them the light of the land on the condition that they would bend their stubborn wills and surrender to him. So Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell address. And there's the map. Actually, Google Earth is probably better. Yeah, this map right here on page 127 of your book kind of shows that same thing. They're on the plains of Moab right here. This Gilead, that is the land that they gave to Reuben, Gad, and half-tribe of Manasseh. And they're going to cross the Jordan River into Jericho and then go in as a military campaign to take back their land. They're still on military campaigns trying to take back their land. Plains of Moab. Who is Moab? The Moabites. Lot? Yeah. Yeah. So they're here in this area getting ready to cross over in the Moabites. So that is kind of the same as the map we have on Google Earth. So Leviticus, remember Leviticus was about the Levites, the laws that they were given. Leviticus points the way to the New Testament blood sacrifice for sin being fulfilled by Christ as the Lamb. Remember, Leviticus was all of the laws about sacrifice and like what sacrifice you had to have, whether it was blood, whether it was fully consumed, partially consumed, whether it was given to the priest or eaten by the people, all the different laws of that. So Leviticus points the way to the New Testament blood sacrifice. The priests typified Jesus as the great high priest, and the worshipers of Leviticus foreshadowed the New Testament Christians. So Leviticus was instruction for mainly instructions for the priests and Levites. Deuteronomy is given as instructions to the layman. So Leviticus was all of these laws and ceremonies they had to go through as Levites, and then Deuteronomy is more like for the lay people, for their stuff. Deuteronomy also supplements by additions or explanations some of the things already recorded in earlier books. Moses begins with kind of remembering the past. And in the first 4 chapters out of 34, it's take heed lest you forget. Now we've got to remember that now we have a complete new group of people. All of the people that came out of Egypt, except for those that were under 20 years of age, are all now dead. And now we have like an entire new group of people. So what Moses does here is he kind of repeats the whole story of what happened. He tells them again of what they went through as they came out. So Moses begins with history and uses it as a teacher, basing his arguments on the past. You see how it has been for the past 40 years. Whenever the nation obeyed God, it has been blessed, and whether it has disobeyed, it has been punished. Therefore, in the future, obey. That seems pretty straightforward and easy. So he does that in the first 4 chapters. Then he gives them the 10 commandments and related commandments, so from 4 up until 26, are all about giving commandments. And most of Deuteronomy records the law of God for Israel, given to his people as guides for leading his people into faithful relationship with him, and instruct them how to live their daily life acceptable for him. What does righteousness mean? Yeah, isn't that like living a life that's acceptable to God, to be righteous? Yeah, so this is, in effect, righteousness, and to instruct them how to live the daily life acceptable to him. Moses reminds them of the great events at Sinai, when the maker of heaven and earth talked to them from the fiery, smoky, quaking mountain. So let me go to in Deuteronomy 4:15 through 19. Remember, a lot of these, anyone who had been born during that 40 years, from infants up to 40 years old, had not seen that. So he repeats it in chapter 4, verse 15 through 19. Take careful heed to yourselves, for you saw no form when the Lord spoke to you at Horeb, out of the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make for yourself a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is in the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, or the likeness of any fish that is in the water beneath the earth. And take heed lest you lift your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun, moon, and stars, and the hosts of heavens, you feel driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord God has given to all the people under the whole earth as a heritage. So what he does here is he says, and that's, second commandment, don't make any graven images, right? So he says when God appeared to us, he didn't appear. We heard his voice. We saw the evidence that he was there. Remember, there's a great earthquake. The sky went dark. The clouds descended. The flames were there. And remember, there was also a trumpet blast. Remember, it started with that? The trumpet blast started and got louder and louder and louder until it was just unbearable. So all of that happened, when God came down on the mountain. So he's reminding them that. But then he's also using an example, we didn't see anything, so there's no way you can grave an image that represents God, right? He didn't come down looking like a giant whatever. There's no image. So Moses gives these examples in here of what happened and how it applies to the 10 Commandments. So Moses encouraged them to remember that the Lord did not make his covenant with our fathers, but with us, with all those who are alive here today. That was in 5:3. And in that, the Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, those who are here today, and with us who are alive. The Lord talked with you face to face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. So Moses is kind of going through explaining to this new younger generation. Again, I'm sure they'd heard the stories over and over for 40 years, but he's given it to them again one last time and recording it for us, for all time. So Moses is talking to a group of Israelites that had not, for the most part, seen the miracles that took place in Egypt. He warns the new generation God will bless those who obey and punish those who disobey. So these chapters cover the basic commandments, the law of worship and holy living, and punishment for specific offenses. Remember, like I said, a Deuteronomy is like a legal document. And in a legal document, like in renting an apartment, your landlord will do things and you do things. And as long as everyone does their things and you don't get evicted. And so that would be punishment, would be getting evicted. Did they ever get evicted? Got evicted a lot. Yeah, they weren't good tenants. In 27 to 30, over here, blessings and curses. One of the first things that Israel were to do was to establish themselves in the new land. So what God is going to tell them to do is says, okay, when you cross into the new land, here's what I want you to do. This relates to the 10 Commandments and remember the whole thing was, I will bless those who bless, I will curse those who curse. This is about blessings and curses. They haven't crossed over yet, but Moses is telling them, okay, when you get there, God wants you to do this. So now we get to go back to Google Earth. So one of the first things they were to do was establish themselves in the land of Canaan, was to march to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, 2 mountains in the center of the country, and there set up great plastered stones on which the law of God was to be written. 6 tribes were to stand upon Mount Gerizim to declare blessings upon the people for obedience for the law, and the other 6 tribes were to stand on Mount Ebal to declare curses upon the people of disobedience. 2 million people are told once they cross that they are to, now they went into Jericho first, but then they went up here to these 2 mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. These 2 mountaintops are 2 miles apart. With a valley between them. So on this one, this Mount Gerizim, and there were 6 tribes that went up here. It was Benjamin and Manasseh, I think, and Levi. No, I'm sorry. Simeon, Reuben, I forget. It was 4 of them went, or 6 of them went out on here, and they were proclaiming blessings. So we had half of the people, so 1 million people gathered on top of this hill, and they pronounced blessings. They had to make a stone with all the 10 commandments and leave it on top of this mountain. And at the same time, 2 miles away, across this valley, and on top of this hill, another 1 million people stood, and they had pronounced curses of what would happen. And we'll look at those. I think it's kind of interesting that there's all these homes and stuff on the blessing one and nothing on the cursed one. I don't know if that's significant, but if we look at those, so when Moses, I'm reading from 27:11. Moses commanded the people on the same day, "These shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people who have crossed over: Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And they shall stand on Mount Ebal to curse: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. And the Levites shall speak with a loud voice and say to all the men of Israel, Cursed is the one who makes a carven or molten image, an abomination to the Lord, of the work of his craftsmanship, and sets it up in secret. And all the people shall answer and say, Amen. Cursed is the one who treats his father or mother with contempt, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed is one who moves his neighbor's landmark." So he goes through the 10 commandments, and they curse the people, and everybody says, Amen. And then on the other side, they're doing the same thing, but saying, blessed are the ones who follow this. So it's like a public display of accepting the 10 commandments, and everybody saying amen, which is like, I agree, or, so be it. So there's a commandment to do this when they first come in, and that's given here in the options that affect the future. Now in chapter 28, sets forth the consequences for obeying the law as well as disobeying it. So the first 14 verses show how blessed, rich, and powerful Israel could have been if it had been true to God. But from 15 on, it paints a picture of the black future awaiting the nation if they should take a path of disobedience. In chapter 28, it's just a series of blessings. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully his commandments, which I have commanded you today, that the Lord God will set you high above the nations of the earth. And then there's just a whole series of blessings here. Blessed shall you be in the city, blessed shall be in the country, blessed shall be the fruit of your body, blessed shall be the baskets of your kneading bowl, blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. Blessed will you be in your storehouses. So it's given all of these blessings in the first part of chapter 28. At 15 it says, "But if it comes to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and the statutes, as I command you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Cursed will be you be in the city, cursed will you be in the country." So he repeats them as curses. So here God is saying, as long as you stay in my law, you will be blessed. When you part from my law, you will be cursed. So this is, like I said, Deuteronomy is like a legal contract. It's like a covenant between the two. So the key subject of this is God's covenant. Deuteronomy is based on a suzerain vassal treaty, or a covenant concept. God is the suzerain, and the people are the vassals. This treaty opens with two sections: the identification of the suzerain by his name and title, the historical survey of the suzerain's dealing with the vassal. The purpose is to illustrate to the vassal how the suzerain has done what the suzerain has done to protect and establish the vassal, who therefore owes submission and allegiance to the suzerain. These two sections referred to as a preamble. The next section of this treaty lists the stipulations. What the vassal is required to do is spelled out in principle and detail. This section is also concluded with the requirement that the vassal deposit his copy of the treaty in the temple, where he is to occasionally read it and study it to refresh his memory concerning his duties. What did we just talk about? 700 years, right? So here in these stipulations, one of the stipulations is that you deposited his copy in the treaty in the temple. Remember, Moses had him take it into and put it next to the Ark of the Covenant, so it was in the temple, where he is to occasionally read and study it to refresh his memory. Is 700 years occasionally? Apparently it was to them. So the last section of these treaties contains the blessings and cursings of the suzerain. If the stipulations are met by the vassal, he will receive the blessings, which are listed. If the vassal fails to meet the stipulations, he will receive the curses, which are also listed. So these are notes from this guy. So a suzerain is a sovereign state having some control over another state that is intentionally autonomous. A vassal is a holder of land by feudal tenure or condition of homage and allegiance, or a person or country in some subordinate position to another. This is just from some other notes from another course I took. So the preamble was, which establishes the players, is Deuteronomy 1. A historic review of the relationship between the two parties. So there's a historic review. Moses did that. He gave a review of the history. Guiding principles of the stipulations is Deuteronomy 5-11. Detailed stipulations is 12-26. Documents, clauses, and public renewal of commitment is 29-31. Invocations of witness is 32. Blessings and curses is 27-28. And then summary is 33-34. So Deuteronomy follows the exact boilerplate of a legal document today. Maybe I should put that another way. A legal document today follows Deuteronomy. So attorneys aren't that smart. They just copied what God gave them. But it's interesting that it's such a legal document. And what were some of the things that they were to not do? What were some of the stipulations that the vassal, the Israelites, were not supposed to do? Other gods. What did they do? Follow other gods. Yeah. Not marry with other nations. What they do? Married other nations. It's kind of like, don't eat that cookie, whatever you do. Yeah. So it's spelled out exactly what they're supposed to do and not supposed to do. And they did, of course, exactly what they're not supposed to do. In 31-34, we see the parting words of Moses. Now here Moses gives three final charges: an interpretation of the philosophy of God's judgment in history, and a reminder of blessings awaiting the people and the land. Moses' words are not bitter, but one's bright and warm and hopeful. Moses remains a spiritual giant on his dying day. So in chart 26, page 130, do I not have it? 4, 5. Okay. So at the end here, the parting words, he gives them a charge to challenge to devotion. There's a song, which is the witness of God's judgment. The benediction is blessings of Israel. And then the last thing is the change of leadership. Moses is at a time right now, he's just finished this. He's going to finish writing this out. give it to the Levites to keep it with the Ark of the Covenant, and then he gets to go up on Mount Nebo and see the land for the last time, and then he's going to die. So I would have been writing real slow. And then 27 is just this. So at the end here, we see a change of leadership. We have 2 million people. They're all between the ages of 0 and 60. Remember, everyone over 20 passed away. So those from 0 to 20 at the first time that they came in, they were still alive. We're 38 years later, so they're 58 years old, from 0 to 58. We have Aaron and Moses. Aaron has passed away at this time. Moses is going to pass away. So the only ones left that are older than that are Joshua and Caleb. Joshua has been with Moses, since they came out. He was one of the leaders. He was a military campaign leader. He will be the one who will take the people in. It's interesting that Joshua and Yeshua are almost identical in the Hebrew language. So Joshua is like a picture of Jesus taking those who will enter by faith into the promised land and taking them through the Jordan River. So we will see next week that Joshua is going to lead them into the promised land on faith, right? So his salvation is based on faith. What does he do when he gets in the promised land? He works for 7 years. So was his salvation by faith or works? By faith, right? But what was the evidence of his faith, of his salvation? His works. Yeah. So it's just like when you get into James, in the book of James in the New Testament, show me your faith without works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. So it's interesting that he goes in, but then he works for 7 years, and it's a 7-year campaign to cleanse the land. So this gets us through the Torah. We have gone through the first part of the book. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy is the Torah. The next section we're going to go into starting next week is the history. And that will start out with Joshua, then Judges, then 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. We'll go through those 12 books. So, any questions so far? Let me just look at this very last part here. In 34 of Deuteronomy, then Moses went up on the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilgal, as far as Dan and Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah, as far as the western sea. The south, the plains of the valley of Jericho, and the city of palm trees, as far as Zor. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have caused you to see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he, capital H, God, he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Porah. But no one knows his grave to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, and his natural vigor diminished. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, so the days of weeping and mourning for Moses ended. Now Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the children of Israel heeded him and did as the Lord had commanded him. But since then there has not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, who the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, before Pharaoh, before all his servants, and in all his land, and by all the mighty power and all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of Israel. So that's how it ends. And then next week we cross the river into the promised land. So, any questions or?